She had a valid ticket, a Diamond Elite card. She arrived early, dressed like a professional. But still, on flight 3921, someone looked at her and decided she didn't belong. 5 minutes later, they'd learn exactly who she was, and they'd regret everything. "Ma'am, I'm afraid this seat is usually reserved for our VIP clientele." Celeste Morgan looked up from her seat. 1D, front row, first class, her leather tote tucked beneath her feet, boarding pass still in hand. Calm, composed, she raised an eyebrow. "I am VIP," she said, handing the ticket without hesitation. The flight attendant, Brittany, took the pass. Her eyes scanned it quickly, then flicked up. Diamond Elite. 1D. No mistake. But instead of stepping aside, Brittany paused. A sharp voice cut in from behind. "That's my seat." The voice didn't ask. It claimed. Celeste didn't turn immediately. She didn't need to. She could feel the entitlement behind her. Pressed, polished, confident it would win. The kind of confidence that had never been challenged. Brittany hesitated, fingers tightening around the boarding pass, like it might change if she looked again. Around them, the quiet hum of first-class boarding slowed. Conversations thinned. Someone stopped mid-step. A tension crept in, subtle but unmistakable. Celeste finally glanced over her shoulder. The woman standing there looked exactly like she expected, impeccably styled, pale blonde hair set in place as if turbulence itself wouldn't dare touch it. Designer coat draped perfectly. A posture that said she had never been told no, and certainly not by someone already sitting in her seat. "I always sit there," the woman continued, louder now. "Everyone on this route knows that. Not a single word about tickets. Not a glance at policy. Just ownership. Assumed, unquestioned." Celeste turned back to Brittany. Her voice stayed even. "Is there a problem with my reservation?" Brittany swallowed. "Well, Miss—" She glanced again at the name. "Morgan, you did book the seat, but Miss Whitford is one of our long-standing clients." Long-standing. Celeste let the words sit. "So," she said slowly, "because she's flown longer, my seat becomes optional?" The silence stretched. Brittany's practiced smile faltered. "We could move you to 5A. Same cabin, same service." Across the aisle, a man lowered his newspaper. A woman near the window frowned. Someone behind them lifted a phone just slightly, enough to record without being obvious. Celeste didn't raise her voice, didn't bristle. She simply looked back at her seat, then at Brittany. "No," she said, "I won't be moving." The blonde woman scoffed. "Unbelievable. They're really letting anyone up here now." That was when it shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but the air changed. Celeste felt it settle in her chest. Not anger, not embarrassment, but clarity. The same clarity she'd felt in boardrooms where she'd been underestimated. The same calm she'd carried into negotiations that changed entire industries. She stood, not because she was conceding, but because she was deciding something. Around her, whispers sparked. She's right. That's her seat. She has Diamond Elite. Celeste stepped into the aisle, her movements unhurried, deliberate. As she walked past row 2, a man murmured, "That wasn't okay." She reached 5A and sat down slowly, opened her tote, pulled out her laptop. The screen lit her face. And somewhere between Vancouver and Washington, while the cabin exhaled in relief, decisions were being made that no one on this plane was ready for. They thought this was about a seat. They had no idea they had just challenged the one person who could end their careers before the plane even landed. Celeste settled into seat 5A with the same composure she'd had in 1D. No stiff shoulders, no visible frustration, just control. From where she sat, she had a clear view of the front row. Brittany leaned toward Lydia Whitford, because of course that was her name now, speaking in a softened tone reserved for people who expected the world to bend. "We'll have your preferred champagne shortly, Ms. Whitford. Please let me know if there's anything you need." Lydia smiled, satisfied. Not grateful. Satisfied. As if this correction had merely restored the natural order of things. Celeste watched quietly. The cabin itself was immaculate. Cream leather seats, chrome accents, soft lighting designed to make people feel important. But Celeste had learned long ago that luxury didn't erase bias. It often hid it better. She opened her laptop, not to work, but to observe. This flight wasn't an accident. She hadn't booked it for comfort. She'd booked it to see something with her own eyes. 2 rows ahead, Lydia crossed her legs and glanced back just long enough to make sure Celeste saw her sitting there. The look wasn't hostile. It was worse. It was dismissive. A man in row 3 leaned toward his wife. "She had the right seat," he whispered. "I know," the woman replied. "I saw the card." But neither said anything out loud. That was how it always worked. Witnesses everywhere, accountability nowhere. Brittany returned with a silver tray, champagne for Lydia, water for everyone else. When she reached Celeste, she paused. "I'm really sorry about the inconvenience," she said quietly. "If there's anything I can do." Celeste met her eyes, not coldly, not warmly, just directly. "Next time," she said, "follow the reservation." Brittany nodded quickly and moved on. Celeste leaned back and allowed herself a slow breath. She glanced at her watch. Still early. Plenty of time. On her screen, a secure dashboard sat minimized beneath a generic spreadsheet. Morgan Equinox Capital. Private. Silent. Effective. In less than 2 hours, a transaction would finalize. One she'd been overseeing for months. One that most of Skylux's leadership still believed was theoretical. Her presence on this flight wasn't symbolic. It was strategic. Up front, Lydia laughed softly at something Brittany said. The sound carried, sharp and confident. "Honestly," Lydia said, not bothering to lower her voice, "you'd think standards mattered more in first class." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Celeste didn't react. She typed a single note into her private journal. Privilege doesn't announce itself. It assumes. She closed the laptop again. The engines hummed steadily as the plane climbed. Outside the window, the sky stretched wide and indifferent. Inside the cabin, a hierarchy had been reinforced, and Celeste Morgan had just finished watching exactly how it worked when no one thought it mattered. They believed the moment had passed. But Celeste hadn't come to argue. She'd come to confirm who Skylux really served, before deciding what to do about it. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and the cabin exhaled. Laptops opened, glasses clinked. Conversations resumed in hushed, polished tones, the sound of people who believed nothing truly disruptive could happen this high above the ground. Celeste remained still. From 5A, she could see everything without being seen. The way Brittany lingered near Lydia's row. The way requests from certain passengers were answered faster, with warmer smiles. The way others, still in first class, still paying the same premium, were handled efficiently but without reverence. It was subtle, almost defensible, almost. A flight attendant knelt beside Lydia, adjusting her table without being asked. "Would you like the menu now, or after we level off?" "Now," Lydia said, "and I'll have the salmon, lightly warmed. Last time it was overdone." Of course. 2 rows back, a retired couple waited with their menus unopened. Celeste made another mental note. This was exactly why she'd boarded early. Why she'd chosen this specific route. Why she'd insisted on flying under her own name instead of a proxy. Policy always looked clean on paper. Culture never did. A man across the aisle finally leaned toward Celeste. He spoke quietly, as if afraid of being overheard. "You handled that well," he said. "Most people would have made a scene." Celeste offered a small smile. "Most people don't have the luxury of staying calm." He nodded, understanding more than he said. At the front, Lydia's voice floated back again. "Some people mistake silence for weakness," she said to no one in particular. Celeste heard it clearly. She didn't look up. Instead, she opened her laptop again, this time for real. The secure interface came alive. Numbers, confirmations, legal language stripped of emotion. Acquisition status, pending final clearance. Control threshold, minutes away. She scrolled calmly, as if reviewing quarterly projections. In reality, she was watching the final moments of a system that believed it was untouchable. A chime sounded softly over the intercom as the captain announced cruising altitude. Applause rippled lightly through the cabin. Lydia raised her glass in a small toast, already celebrating a victory she didn't realize was temporary. Brittany passed by Celeste's row again. This time she slowed. "Can I get you anything?" she asked. Celeste looked up. "Just water." "Thank you." Brittany nodded, and for the first time, there was uncertainty behind her eyes, as if some instinct was whispering that this situation wasn't finished, because it wasn't, far from it. Celeste closed her laptop and rested her hands neatly in her lap. Her pulse was steady, her breathing slow. The test was over. And Skylux Airlines had just failed it, without even knowing it was being graded. They thought the danger had passed. But at 35,000 feet, the paperwork was already moving, and once it finished, no apology would be enough. The cabin dimmed slightly as the lights adjusted for cruising altitude. Outside, clouds rolled beneath the wings like a quiet ocean, calm, endless, unaware of the shift about to take place above them. Celeste glanced at her watch. 5 minutes. That's all it would take. Around her, first class had settled into its familiar rhythm. Champagne refills, linen napkins unfolded, conversations drifting toward investments, real estate, and travel complaints only people with privilege could afford to have. Lydia was holding court now. "I've flown this route for years," she said, gesturing casually with her glass. "They know me. They know what I expect." A man beside her chuckled. "Perks of loyalty." Lydia smiled. "Exactly." Celeste didn't look up, but she listened. Loyalty. That word again. People love to confuse loyalty with entitlement, as if time spent benefiting from a system somehow granted ownership of it. Celeste's phone vibrated gently against her palm. Secure notification. Final clearance confirmed. Control transfer initiating. She didn't react. No smile. No tightening of her jaw. Just a quiet acknowledgement as she slipped the phone back into her tote. Across the aisle, Brittany was whispering to another attendant. Their eyes flicked, briefly, towards Celeste. Something had changed. The ease was gone, replaced by the faint tension of people sensing they'd missed something important. Lydia laughed again. "Honestly, I don't know why they even sell those elite cards anymore. It used to mean something." That time, someone did respond. A woman near the window said, softly but clearly, "It still does." Lydia turned, surprised. The woman didn't back down. Celeste felt a flicker of satisfaction. Not pride, but validation. The truth had weight, even when spoken quietly. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, welcoming passengers and confirming their arrival time in Washington, D.C. As he spoke, Celeste's phone buzzed again. Status update, majority stake secured, effective immediately. There it was. No ceremony, no announcement, just a line of text that shifted power across an entire corporation. Celeste exhaled slowly. At the front of the cabin, Lydia reclined her seat slightly, settling in as if the world were exactly as it should be. Behind her, Brittany checked her tablet, frowned, and refreshed the screen. Her smile vanished. She read it again, then a third time. Her eyes widened just enough to betray her professionalism. Celeste watched the reaction unfold without moving. The system had spoken, and it wasn't on Lydia's side. They thought the worst had already happened. But in less than 5 minutes, every decision made in this cabin was about to come back, with consequences no one could undo. Brittany stood frozen in the aisle, tablet held a little too tightly in both hands. At first, she told herself it was a system error. Wi-Fi on planes was unreliable, updates lagged, messages duplicated or vanished all the time. But this wasn't that. The alert was still there when she refreshed, and again when she opened the internal channel reserved only for supervisors. Her throat went dry. Across the cabin, Lydia was mid-sentence, laughing about a hotel in Zurich that finally learned how to treat people properly. Brittany barely heard her. The words on the screen drowned out everything else. Majority ownership transfer complete. Interim chair, Celeste Morgan. Effective immediately. Brittany's eyes lifted, slowly, instinctively, to seat 5A. Celeste sat exactly as she had all flight. Upright, calm, unbothered, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. Brittany swallowed and took a step forward, then stopped. Training told her to confirm. Authority told her to escalate. Fear told her to do neither. Another attendant leaned close and whispered, "What's wrong?" Brittany angled the tablet just enough for her to see. The color drained from the woman's face. At the front, Lydia snapped her fingers lightly. "Excuse me? My glass is empty." Brittany didn't move. For the first time since boarding, Lydia wasn't the most important person in the room. Celeste watched the shift ripple outward. Whispers, glances, the subtle rearranging of attention. A man 2 rows back leaned forward. "Something going on up there?" No one answered. Brittany finally approached Celeste's seat, posture stiff but respectful in a way it hadn't been before. "Miss Morgan," she said quietly, voice barely steady. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Celeste looked up, meeting her eyes evenly. "Of course." They stood in the aisle, not dramatic, not confrontational. Just 2 professionals, one suddenly realizing who the other truly was. "There's been an update," Brittany said. "From corporate." "I know," Celeste replied. That was all. No gloating, no explanation, just confirmation. Behind them, Lydia's voice cut through the quiet. "Is there a problem? Because this is becoming disruptive." Brittany turned to her slowly. "No, Ms. Whitford," she said. "Everything is being reviewed." Celeste returned to her seat and opened her laptop one final time. The dashboard now displayed a single line at the top. Authority active. She closed it again. The plane continued smoothly toward Washington, unaware that one of its own had just changed hands mid-air. They thought the incident was over, but the moment Brittany's tablet updated, the real story began, and no one in first class was ready for what came next. The atmosphere in first class was no longer relaxed. It hadn't exploded into chaos. Nothing so obvious. Instead, it tightened. Conversations lowered. Laughter disappeared. People began watching instead of talking. Brittany returned to the galley, her movements precise but hurried. She spoke in hushed tones to the lead attendant, Mark, a man with decades in the air and the calm authority of someone who had seen everything. He listened. Once. Then he looked toward seat 5A. Mark didn't rush over. He didn't panic. He simply adjusted his jacket and walked down the aisle with purpose. "Ms. Morgan," he said respectfully, stopping beside her seat. "May I confirm something with you?" Celeste looked up. "You may." Mark gestured slightly toward the front. "Would you be willing to join me for a private conversation?" Lydia turned in her seat, clearly irritated. "This is ridiculous! You keep interrupting the cabin for—" "Ms. Whitford," Mark said calmly, without looking at her. "We'll be with you shortly." The words landed harder than they sounded. Celeste stood and followed Mark forward. Not as a passenger being escorted, but as someone being acknowledged. When they stopped near the galley, Mark lowered his voice. "We received an internal alert. It appears there's been a significant change in corporate structure." Celeste nodded once. "That's correct." Mark inhaled slowly. He didn't ask her to explain. He didn't need to. "In that case," he said, choosing each word carefully, "we want to ensure we're providing the appropriate level of service." Celeste met his gaze. "Then start by treating every passenger according to policy, not preference." Mark nodded. "Understood." They returned to their seats. But the cabin had noticed. Lydia stared, her expression no longer smug, confused now, edged with something else. Unease. Brittany moved quickly to correct small things. Menus redistributed evenly. Glasses refilled without hierarchy. Apologies issued quietly, carefully. Too late to undo what had already happened. Celeste sat back down, hands folded, her face unreadable. She wasn't here to embarrass anyone. She was here to witness. And now, to decide. Because leadership wasn't about punishment, it was about accountability. They were finally treating her like she mattered. But Celeste hadn't come for respect. She'd come to decide who still deserved their job. By the time meals were served, first class had gone quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people enjoying luxury, but the uneasy kind, where everyone senses a line has been crossed and no one knows who will be held responsible for it. Celeste watched as Brittany placed identical trays in front of every passenger, no special touches, no whispered favors, just consistency. Policy at last. Lydia barely touched her food. She glanced repeatedly towards seat 5A, her confidence unraveling in small, visible ways. The world she understood, where status insulated her from consequences, was wobbling. Finally, she leaned toward Brittany. "Who is she?" she whispered, sharp and impatient. Brittany stiffened. "She's a Diamond Elite passenger," she said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Brittany didn't answer. Celeste noticed. Halfway through the meal, Mark returned to Celeste's side, lowering his voice again. "Ms. Morgan, if you'd like to speak with the captain or file a formal concern, we can arrange that immediately." Celeste set her fork down slowly. "Tell me something first," she said. Mark waited. "How often does this happen?" He hesitated. "Not often," he said. "But often enough." Celeste nodded. That was the answer she'd expected, and the one that troubled her most. Because this wasn't about one attendant, or one passenger. It was a pattern. She glanced around the cabin, at the people pretending not to listen, at the ones listening very carefully. Celeste raised her voice, just enough to carry, but not enough to cause a scene. "Excuse me," she said. Heads turned. "I have a simple question," she continued. "If I hadn't spoken calmly, if I hadn't had the right card, if I'd reacted differently, would this have ended the same way?" No one answered. Lydia shifted in her seat. Mark looked down. Celeste let the silence do the work. "Thank you," she said finally, and returned to her meal. The message had landed. They thought the tension would fade. But Celeste had just asked the one question that could unravel everything Skylux had been protecting. The plane hit a pocket of light turbulence, just enough to rattle glasses and force a few nervous laughs. The captain's voice came on, calm and rehearsed. "Nothing to worry about, folks. Just a brief patch." Celeste almost smiled. Some turbulence didn't shake the aircraft. Some shook systems. The cabin crew moved efficiently, securing carts, checking belts. Brittany passed Celeste's row again, slower this time, her professionalism stretched thin by something deeper than procedure. As she adjusted a latch, she spoke under her breath. "I'm sorry." Celeste looked at her, not unkindly. "For what?" Brittany swallowed. "For assuming." Celeste nodded once. "That's where it starts. Not with hate. Not with cruelty. With assumption." The turbulence eased. The cabin settled again, but the emotional aftershocks lingered. Lydia stood abruptly, pressing the call button with more force than necessary. "I need to speak to someone in charge," she said loudly. Mark appeared within seconds. "How can I help, Ms. Whitford?" "This situation is unacceptable," Lydia snapped. "I was displaced from my usual seat. I was embarrassed. And now I'm being treated like everyone else." The words hung in the air. Mark chose his response carefully. "All passengers are being treated according to company policy." "Well, your policy is wrong," Lydia said, "and I know people who can fix it." Celeste closed her eyes briefly, not in frustration, but in recognition. She had heard that sentence before, in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in moments right before people realized power had shifted. Mark straightened. "I'll make a note of your concern." Celeste spoke before Lydia could continue. "You should," she said calmly. "Accuracy matters." Lydia turned, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" Celeste met her gaze evenly. "When complaints are reviewed, context is everything." Lydia scoffed. "And who exactly are you to say that?" The cabin went still. Celeste didn't raise her voice, didn't posture. She simply answered, "Someone who values accountability." Lydia laughed sharply. "That's rich." Celeste said nothing more. She didn't need to. The turbulence warning light clicked off overhead, but no one relaxed. Lydia thought she was about to escalate the situation. She had no idea she'd just challenged the person who would be reviewing her complaint personally. The captain made another brief announcement, this time about their descent schedule. His voice was steady, reassuring, completely unaware of the quiet reckoning unfolding behind the cockpit door. Lydia was still standing. She crossed her arms, eyes locked on Celeste, waiting for something. An apology, a retreat, a crack. It didn't come. Mark cleared his throat. Ms. Whitford, please return to your seat. We're preparing for landing. Lydia exhaled sharply and sat down, but the defiance remained. This isn't over, she muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Celeste heard it, and for the first time since boarding she responded, not with a question, not with silence, but with a fact. You're right, she said. It isn't. Lydia turned again. Then maybe you'd like to tell us who you think you are. A few passengers stiffened, others leaned in despite themselves. Celeste stood slowly, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to command the space. My name is Celeste Morgan, she said evenly, and as of 37 minutes ago I became the majority shareholder of Skylux Airlines. The words didn't echo. They landed. A man gasped. Someone whispered, "No way!" Brittany froze mid-step. Lydia laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. That's absurd. Celeste nodded. I imagine it feels that way. Mark's posture changed instantly. Ms. Morgan, I don't need formalities, Celeste said. I need honesty. She turned her gaze to the cabin. What happened today didn't break any rules. That's the problem. No one interrupted. It revealed them. Lydia's face had gone pale. You're lying. Celeste met her stare. You're welcome to verify. Mark already was. His tablet chimed softly. He didn't need to say anything. The truth was written across his face. Lydia's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since boarding, she had no words. Celeste sat back down. The plane began its descent. They finally knew who she was, but knowing her name was only the beginning of what she was about to change. The cabin remained frozen long after Celeste sat back down. Not a single conversation resumed. Not a single phone came out. It was as if everyone understood, instinctively, that whatever happened next would matter. Lydia stared straight ahead, jaw tight, hands clenched in her lap. For the first time, her confidence had nowhere to go. Mark leaned closer to Celeste, his voice low and careful. Ms. Morgan, when we land, corporate protocol, E. Celeste lifted a hand gently. This doesn't require protocol. It requires truth. Mark nodded. Understood. Brittany avoided Lydia's row entirely now. Not out of spite, out of awareness. The hierarchy she'd been trained to uphold had shifted, and she could feel it in her bones. The plane descended smoothly. Outside, the city came into view, orderly, sprawling, indifferent to personal reckonings at 30,000 feet. As the wheels touched the runway, the cabin exhaled together. But relief didn't follow. When the seatbelt sign chimed off, Mark didn't announce deplaning. Instead, he stepped into the aisle. Ladies and gentlemen, he said calmly, please remain seated for a brief moment. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Lydia stiffened. Celeste stayed seated, hands folded. This will only take a moment, Mark continued. Thank you for your patience. He turned toward Celeste. Ms. Morgan? Celeste stood. Every eye followed her. I want to be very clear, she said. No one here is being punished for one moment, but moments reveal patterns, and patterns determine culture. She looked toward Brittany, not accusing, not absolving, just honest. Culture doesn't change in public statements, it changes in private accountability. Lydia scoffed weakly. You can't do this quietly, can you? Celeste met her gaze. There was a quiet way to handle this. You declined it. Silence. Mark nodded once. Thank you, Celeste said and returned to her seat. The aisle remained blocked. No one was leaving yet. They thought landing meant escape, but Celeste wasn't finished, and the hardest consequences were still waiting beyond the gate. The cabin doors remained closed. That alone told everyone this was no longer routine. Outside, ground crew moved efficiently, unaware that time inside the aircraft had slowed to a deliberate crawl. A senior operations manager boarded quietly, tablet in hand, eyes scanning faces before landing on Mark. He listened. Once. Then he looked at Celeste and straightened. Ms. Morgan, he said, choosing his tone carefully. Welcome aboard. Lydia's head snapped up. You've got to be kidding me. No one acknowledged her. The manager turned to Brittany next. I'll need you to join me after deplaning. Brittany nodded, face pale but composed. She didn't argue. She didn't run. She understood the difference between accountability and attack. Celeste stood again, but this time not to command the room. To be clear, she said, this is not a spectacle. Everyone here will deplane shortly. No one is being detained. She paused, letting her gaze pass briefly over Lydia. But actions don't disappear just because a flight ends. Lydia stood abruptly. This is harassment. Celeste shook her head gently. No, this is review. The doors finally opened. Mark gestured for Celeste to exit first, not as privilege, but as recognition. She didn't rush. As she stepped into the jet bridge, the manager walked beside her. You'll receive a full report within 48 hours. Make it 24, Celeste replied calmly. Behind them, Lydia remained seated, stunned, waiting for a protection that wasn't coming. Brittany followed last, shoulders squared, eyes forward. The hierarchy had reversed, quietly, irreversibly. They thought it was over once the doors opened, but the final consequence wasn't on the plane. It was waiting in the executive suite. By the time Celeste reached the terminal, the noise of the airport rushed back in. Rolling luggage, overhead announcements, hurried footsteps. Life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for Skylux Airlines, everything had changed. Celeste paused near the window overlooking the runway. The aircraft sat quietly now, just another plane among dozens, no sign of the reckoning it had carried in its cabin. She checked her phone. Messages had already begun arriving. Legal, operations, board members who had suddenly found their calendars very flexible. She ignored them, for now. Instead, she opened a new note and typed a single sentence. Policy without dignity is just discrimination with paperwork. Inside the terminal, Lydia finally emerged, flanked by no one. Her stride was stiff, her expression unreadable. The confidence that had boarded the plane never made it off. Brittany followed later, speaking quietly with the operations manager. She looked shaken, but also relieved. Like someone who knew the truth had finally caught up, and that pretending otherwise would have been worse. Celeste didn't approach either of them. Leadership wasn't about confrontation. It was about setting a direction and letting reality do the rest. That afternoon, an internal memo went out across Skylux. No press release, no corporate spin, just facts. A review of first-class seating disputes, mandatory bias and escalation training, clear enforcement of elite policy, no exceptions, no assumptions, and a leadership audit of customer-facing roles. The message ended with one line. Respect is not a perk. It is the standard. By evening, Celeste was in her office, jacket draped over the chair, city lights blinking beyond the glass. On her desk sat a printed boarding pass, seat 1D. She hadn't framed it. She hadn't thrown it away. She kept it there as a reminder, not of humiliation, of clarity. Because that seat was never really about comfort. It was about who was believed, who was questioned, and who was forced to prove they belonged. Celeste closed the file, turned off the light, and walked out, knowing the next person who sat in 1D would be treated differently. Not because of who they were, but because of what had finally been confronted. They thought they were removing a passenger from a seat. Instead, they exposed a system and the one person powerful enough to change it. They thought this story was about a seat, but the next one is about a child, and a mistake no one can take back. In the video on your screen now, a young girl is humiliated in first class. Security is called, accusations are made, and then her father walks in, and the entire cabin goes silent. If you believe dignity should never be questioned, and that assumptions can destroy lives in seconds, don't miss what happens next. Watch the next story now.